Detective disappeared in Chicago in 1994. 11 years later, a farmer dug up this on his land. The biting wind whipping off Lake Michigan in November of 1994 wasn't unusual for Chicago, but for Detective Arthur Art Miller, it felt sharper, carrying a premonition, an icy whisper of fate. Art, a man etched by 43 years of urban grit and police procedural, usually welcomed the chill. It cleared his head, a necessary antidote to the city's ceaseless thrum, the perpetual symphony of sirens and distant L-trains. His office at the Area 1 Violent Crimes headquarters in Bronzeville was less a workspace and more a testament to his relentless dedication. Towering stacks of unsolved cold case files mingling precariously with active investigations, a half-eaten sandwich perpetually growing stale on his desk, and a perpetually brewing pot of lukewarm coffee that tasted more of desperation than caffeine. Art wasn't a hero in the cinematic sense, no flashy quick draws or brilliant deductions from a single hair. He was a grinder, a bloodhound with an uncanny nose for the truth, even when it stank of corruption or despair. He believed in the slow, painstaking accretion of facts, the relentless pursuit of every lead, no matter how faint. His current obsession was the insidious string of disappearances plaguing the South Side. These weren't gang-related turf wars, nor typical runaway teenagers seeking adventure. These were quiet folks, an elderly bakery owner named Eleanor Vance, known for her rye bread, who simply vanished from her apartment. A retired postal worker, Samuel Sam O'Malley, who seemingly evaporated from his stoop. A young single mother, Maria Rodriguez, last seen walking her child to kindergarten. No ransom notes, no bodies, just gone. The official police line for public consumption was isolated incidents, but Art felt a chilling, almost artistic pattern, a meticulousness that spoke of something far more sinister than random acts of violence. He'd been working the case for nearly 6 months, poring over meager clues, chasing shadows down blind alleys, battling skepticism from his superiors who saw only disparate files. His wife, Sarah, a woman whose patience was as boundless as her enduring love for him, often found him staring blankly at the flickering television screen in the early hours of the morning, his mind miles away, still dissecting timelines, trying to force the disparate pieces into a coherent mosaic. Their 10-year-old daughter, Lily, with her bright, innocent eyes, would often leave crayon drawings on his pillow before school, little stick figures of Daddy, the superhero, a title he secretly cherished but felt increasingly unworthy of as the South Side swallowed more of its inhabitants. That Tuesday, November 15, 1994, started like any other, cloaked in the gray light of a Chicago dawn. Art kissed Sarah goodbye, the familiar, comforting scent of her vanilla perfume lingering on his cheek. Lily was already off to school, her cheerful chatter still echoing in the silent house. He stopped at his usual greasy spoon, Patty's Place, a bastion of working-class authenticity, for a black coffee strong enough to strip paint and a stale jelly donut, exchanging gruff pleasantries with the owner, Old Man Flanagan, whose hands trembled slightly as he poured. The city was slowly waking up around him, a cacophony of honking cabs, distant sirens, and the rumble of delivery trucks. Art spent the morning at the precinct, hunched over his desk, sifting through hundreds of missing persons reports, cross-referencing names, addresses, daily habits, searching for the elusive common thread. He circled commonalities that spoke to him. Each victim had a strong routine, a quiet, almost invisible life, no obvious enemies. They weren't targets of opportunity. They were selected, carefully chosen, almost curated. Around noon, a call came in on his dedicated tip line, the cheap plastic receiver crackling with static. An anonymous voice, shaky and garbled by what sounded like a cheap payphone connection, mumbled something about a meet in the Foundry, an abandoned industrial complex near the Chicago River, notorious for its crumbling edifices, homeless encampments, and deeply shady dealings. The voice suggested evidence pertaining to the disappearances, a break that could blow the whole thing open. Art was instinctively cautious. He'd walked into too many ambushes in his 20 years on the force. He tried to trace the call, but it was, as expected, a burner untraceable. He radioed it in, informing the dispatcher he had a potential lead, but something in the sheer urgency of the voice, a desperate, almost palpable note of genuine fear, gnawed at him. His partner, the reliable and pragmatic Detective Carlos Ramirez, was tied up in court all day, testifying in a gang-related homicide. Art, ever the lone wolf when a lead felt impossibly hot and time-sensitive, decided to check it out himself. He told his desk sergeant, a gruff veteran named Miller, no relation, he was grabbing lunch and would be back for paperwork before the afternoon shift change. A small, necessary lie, but one born of a gut feeling, a primal urge to follow the scent. He scribbled Foundry Anon tip Martha Jenkins locket on a sticky note and slapped it on his monitor, a habit he had for urgent follow-ups, a silent promise to himself to return and document properly. He also vaguely remembered a minor incident a few weeks prior, a hushed conversation overheard in the break room about a large, well-funded charity group buying up property from vulnerable elderly folks on the South Side. He hadn't connected it to his cases then, but a tiny, nagging doubt had lingered. He drove his beat-up 10-year-old Caprice Classic, the heater rattling like a dying man's last breath, through the grimy, industrial arteries of the city, past skeletal warehouses and desolate train tracks shrouded in graffiti. The foundry loomed ahead, a monstrous skeletal monument to a bygone industrial era, its broken, vacant windows like the dead eyes of some forgotten leviathan. The wind howled through its rusted girders, a mournful, hollow sound that seemed to carry the city's sorrow. He parked a block away, carefully choosing a spot obscured by a crumbling brick wall, out of sight. His hand instinctively rested on the reassuring, cold weight of his service pistol holstered at his hip as he approached on foot. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth, stagnant water, and decay. He moved through the cavernous interior, his heavy footsteps echoing unnaturally in the vast, silent space, calling out softly, "Hello, anyone here? Detective Miller, Chicago PD." Nothing. Just the wind and the intermittent creaking groan of metal under unseen stress. Then, a glint, a small, tarnished silver locket lay on the concrete floor, half hidden beneath a pile of rotting newspapers and shattered glass. He recognized it instantly, a surge of adrenaline tightening his chest. It belonged to Martha Jenkins, the first woman to disappear, a quiet librarian who always wore it, a family heirloom containing faded tintypes of her parents. Art's heart hammered against his ribs. This wasn't a wild goose chase. This was it. This was the break. He knelt, pulling on a pair of latex gloves from his jacket pocket, about to carefully bag the evidence when a sudden, sickeningly soft but devastatingly powerful blow to the back of his head sent him sprawling into an immediate, all-consuming darkness. His vision swam, lights bursting behind his eyes, then fading to black. The last coherent sound he registered was the scuff of heavy boots on concrete, and a low, guttural laugh, devoid of humor, as the world tilted and then simply ceased to exist. The official investigation into Detective Arthur Miller's sudden, shocking disappearance was launched within a frantic hour, but it felt like playing catch-up from the very start. Sarah was frantic, calling the precinct when Art didn't answer his pager after hours of silence. The desk sergeant remembered the lunch excuse, but the sticky note on Art's monitor confirmed his last known intention. Ramirez was devastated, haunted by the what-ifs, the gnawing regret that he hadn't been there, hadn't insisted on accompanying his partner. The Chicago PD descended on the foundry in force, a swarm of blue lights and flashing cameras, but found little. The locket was gone, no witnesses, not even a homeless person in the shadows, just the pervasive cold, the vast, echoing emptiness, and the chilling silence. The early days of the search were a blur of intense, desperate activity. Police dogs, their keen noses pressed to the cold ground, scoured the surrounding areas. Helicopters buzzed overhead, their searchlights cutting through the night. Divers plunged into the frigid, murky waters of the Chicago River, hoping against hope. Flyers bearing Art's kind, weary face and his vital statistics were plastered across every lamppost, every storefront window in the city. Sarah gave tearful, guttural interviews to local news crews, pleading for information, her voice cracking with a raw, visceral pain that cut through the city's typical cynicism. Lily, her small face pale and etched with incomprehension, sensing her mother's terror, clung to her, whispering, "Daddy will come home, won't he, Mommy?" Sarah would nod, a lie she told herself as much as her bewildered daughter, a fragile shield against the cruel, encroaching truth. Weeks bled into agonizing months, the initial flurry of activity waned. Lades dried up one after another like streams in a drought. The anonymous tip was ultimately dismissed by investigators as a cruel hoax or a misdirection, a waste of precious resources. Art's colleagues, though grieving and deeply disturbed, had to move on to other cases, the relentless tide of urban crime waiting for no one. The investigation into Art Miller's disappearance shifted from an active, high-priority search to a cold case file, meticulously documented, then tucked away in a cold, unforgiving metal cabinet in the archives, gathering dust and forgotten hopes. The department held a small, somber memorial service, acknowledging Art's dedication, his years of service, but it felt hollow, incomplete. No body, no closure. Sarah, a woman consumed by a defiant hope, refused to believe he was truly gone. She kept his side of the bed untouched, his favorite coffee mug on the kitchen counter, a silent vigil against the cruel, undeniable truth. Every unexpected knock on the door, every sudden ring of the landline, sent a jolt of both desperate hope and icy dread through her fragile heart. The years that followed were a testament to Sarah's quiet, unyielding resilience and Lily's fragile, profound strength. Sarah worked 2, sometimes 3, low-paying jobs to keep their small bungalow, refusing to sell it, maintaining it as a monument to a life abruptly halted, a ghost of what once was. Lily grew up without her father, carrying a profound sadness, a deep, pervasive void that no amount of love or comfort from her devoted mother could truly fill. She excelled in school, a quiet, studious girl, often lost in the labyrinthine narratives of books, perhaps searching for answers in fictional worlds that the real one so cruelly denied her. Art's former colleagues, particularly Detective Ramirez, would occasionally visit, bringing flowers on anniversaries, sharing old stories about Art's stubbornness and his dry wit, their faces etched with the lingering guilt of an unsolved case that haunted their dreams. Ramirez, in particular, never truly let it go, often reviewing Art's cold case file late at night, a spectral presence in the empty, silent precinct hallways, muttering to himself, "Where are you, Art? What did you find?" Life, in its brutal, indifferent march, moved inexorably on. The raw, gritty 90s bled into the optimistic, tech-driven 2000s. Technology advanced at a dizzying pace. The old beat-up Caprice classics, once ubiquitous, disappeared from the streets, replaced by sleeker, more fuel-efficient sedans. Dial-up internet gave way to broadband, pagers to clunky early cell phones. But for Sarah and Lily, time had effectively stopped on that cold, desolate November day in 1994, a wound that refused to heal. Scene change, 11 years later, May 2005, the unrelenting sun beat down relentlessly on Elias Thorne's sprawling land in rural Illinois, 100 miles southwest of Chicago, a vast expanse of corn and soybean fields stretching to the horizon under an impossibly blue sky. Elias, a man whose calloused hands were as gnarled and tough as the ancient oak trees bordering his fields, had been working this land his entire life. His father and his father before him had tilled these same fertile acres, cultivating generations of crops under the vast, indifferent sky. It was May 2005, and the spring rains had been unusually heavy, turning parts of his lower field, a section he rarely worked due to its stubborn, clinging clay soil and proximity to a perpetually overflowing creek bed, into a churning, muddy bog. Elias was out on his ancient, rust-flecked John Deere tractor, its diesel engine rumbling a steady thrum, trying to clear a new drainage ditch near the overgrown creek bed. The earth was still soft, clinging to the heavy machinery, slowing its progress. He felt a sudden, sickening lurch as the plow bit into something solid, something unnervingly unyielding that wasn't a rock or a root. It felt different. He killed the engine, the sudden, abrupt silence amplified by the insistent buzzing of insects, the distant caw of a crow. He climbed down from the tractor's seat, his worn leather boots sinking slightly into the viscous mud with a sucking sound. He prodded the obstruction with the toe of his boot. It felt strangely dense, compacted, like heavy fabric or tightly wrapped wood. He grabbed the shovel from the tractor's toolbox, its metal blade glinting in the sun, and began to dig, his farmer's curiosity piqued. The soil was heavy, cloying, clinging to the shovel with an almost sentient tenacity. As he dug deeper, a rank, cloying, metallic odor, sweet and sickly, wafted up from the disturbed earth, assaulting his nostrils. He grimaced. A lifetime of working the land had taught him to recognize the unmistakable, horrifying stench of advanced decay. His heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs, a drumbeat of rising apprehension. He continued to clear away the mud, and then a dark, waterlogged canvas material began to emerge. It was wrapped tightly, meticulously, like a crude, macabre cocoon. Elias felt a profound chill that had nothing to do with the balmy May heat. This wasn't some forgotten piece of farm equipment. This was something else, something buried with intent. He dug more carefully now, his breath catching in his throat, each shovelful revealing more. The canvas slowly revealed its gruesome contents. First, the distinct outline of a shoe, a wingtip, remarkably preserved by the anaerobic, cold conditions of the deep mud. Then a trouser leg, dark blue, the fabric still intact, still recognizable as men's clothing. And finally, the unmistakable sight of bone, a human femur, slick with clay and ancient mud, emerging from the dark, shrouded package. Elias gasped, scrambling backward, stumbling and falling onto his rear in the mud, splattering his face and clothes. He stared wide-eyed at the partial remains, the horrifying, macabre package unearthed from the silent, ancient earth. His mind reeled. He fumbled for his flip phone, the plastic clam shell feeling alien and clumsy in his suddenly trembling hands. The call to the local sheriff's department in the nearby tiny town of Spring Valley was brief, garbled by shock and adrenaline. Within the hour, the quiet, peaceful cornfield was transformed, swarming with flashing blue and red lights, uniformed officers from the county sheriff's office, and soon, specialized crime scene investigators from the Illinois State Police. The entire discovery site was carefully cordoned off with yellow tape, creating a stark contrast against the green of the fields. The initial site became a hive of methodical excavation, a grim archaeological dig. The body, or what remained of it, was carefully, painstakingly exhumed. It had been wrapped not just in heavy canvas, but in layers of thick, industrial-grade tarpaulin, then bound tightly with heavy-duty ropes, and finally weighed down with several large concrete blocks. A professional job designed with chilling premeditation to ensure it stayed buried and hidden forever, immune to the elements or the casual plow of a farmer. The 11 years had taken their inevitable toll, but the cold Chicago winter temperatures and the deep, oxygen-deprived mud had preserved enough. A forensic anthropologist, Dr. Evelyn Reed, a leading expert from the University of Illinois at Chicago, was brought in, along with a team of pathologists from the Cook County Medical Examiner's Office. The initial forensic findings were grim but provided crucial information. The remains belonged to a male, likely Caucasian, approximately in his early to mid-40s at the time of death. Dr. Reed quickly identified evidence of blunt force trauma to the skull, a crushing blow that would have been instantly fatal. No immediate identification was possible from facial features. But then, as the grime and the clinging, ancient mud were meticulously cleaned from the decaying clothing, a glimmer of tarnished metal emerged from the remains of what had been a blazer. A small, circular object, a shield, a detective's badge, and next to it, tucked into the remains of a decaying leather wallet, a laminated identification card. The name was faded but still, miraculously, legible: Arthur Miller. Chicago Police Department. The news hit the Chicago PD like a bombshell, a seismic shockwave through the usually stoic corridors of the precinct. Detective Arthur Miller, found after 11 years, after all hope had faded. The remains were positively identified within hours through dental records, which were meticulously preserved, and a DNA comparison with Sarah and Lily, finally confirming the identity beyond any doubt. The discovery sent shockwaves through the entire department, particularly among the veterans who remembered Art, his quiet dedication, his relentless pursuit of justice. Lieutenant Ramirez, who had carried the burden of his partner's disappearance for over a decade, felt a cold knot of dread mixed with a grim, sickening satisfaction. Art had been right, it hadn't been a hoax. He hadn't just walked away from his family, his life, his duty. He had been murdered. A silence descended on the precinct, a quiet grief, punctuated by the rustling of old files being pulled from dusty archives. The case was immediately reopened, cold case files from 1994 pulled from their dusty shelves, now imbued with a chilling, tangible reality. The sheer brutality and meticulousness of the disposal, the layers of wrapping, the ropes, the weighted burial far from the city spoke volumes. This wasn't a spontaneous act of violence. This was premeditated, professional, a calculated operation designed to make a man vanish without a trace. Someone had wanted Detective Arthur Miller to disappear forever. The new investigation, dubbed Operation Foundry Redux by the newly formed Cold Case Task Force, began with a renewed vigor and a grim determination, now armed with the vastly superior forensic techniques available in 2005 compared to 1994. The forensic anthropologist pinpointed the time of death to within a narrow window around November 15, 1994, aligning perfectly with his disappearance. The trauma to the skull was consistent with a single heavy impact from a blunt object, likely delivered from behind, suggesting an ambush. The autopsy revealed no other defensive injuries that might suggest a prolonged struggle, supporting the theory that he was incapacitated quickly and efficiently. The presence of tiny fragments of concrete and fine, silicate soil within the tarpaulin provided clues about the immediate post-mortem handling. Detectives revisited the foundry, now even more dilapidated, a haunting skeleton of industry. While the original crime scene had been scoured with the technology of the time, new techniques like ground-penetrating radar and luminescent chemical sprays were employed, carefully examining every inch of the decaying structure. While they found no new physical evidence of Art's struggle or the locket, the re-examination solidified the theory of an ambush. The focus then shifted to Art's last known movements, his active cases, his network of informants, and most crucially, the missing persons cases he had been obsessed with in 1994. They had been dismissed as unrelated back then, but now, with Art's grim fate intertwined, they were the key. Sarah Miller, now a woman weathered by 11 years of silent grief, her face etched with the lines of endurance, was tragically thrust back into the relentless glare of the public eye. Her initial fleeting relief at Art being found, at finally having an answer, quickly morphed into a deeper, more profound sorrow as the brutal reality of his violent, lonely end set in. Lily, now a stoic, compassionate young woman of 21, her father's eyes looking out from her own, stood by her mother, providing a quiet strength. The larger Chicago community, still remembering the faded posters and the haunting news reports, offered a complex mix of condolences, a strange blend of relief for the family and renewed despair at the city's persistent darkness. The new investigative team pored over the original files, every page meticulously scanned and digitized. They found Art's sticky note, Foundry Anon tip, Martha Jenkins locket. They found the detailed records of the anonymous call, initially dismissed as a cruel hoax or a tactical misdirection. But now, with a body found 100 miles away, disposed of with professional precision, the pieces started to connect with chilling clarity. Art had been lured. The locket from Martha Jenkins, the missing librarian, the one he had tried to retrieve from beneath the rotting newspapers, was a crucial piece of evidence, a breadcrumb that had vanished from the scene. Its absence then, and its undeniable connection to Art's last moments, became a pivotal new focus. They meticulously re-interviewed everyone, from the aging desk Sergeant Miller to Art's most obscure, long-forgotten informants. The initial investigation had been thorough for its time, but its limitations were starkly apparent in 2005. No widespread CCTV cameras, less digital footprint, less sophisticated DNA analysis. But now, with a body, the motivation for the murder was chillingly clearer. Art had been silenced, permanently. The re-examination of Art's missing persons cases from 1994 revealed a chilling pattern that had been harder to discern a decade prior, lost in the noise of other investigations. The victims were all quiet, unassuming individuals, often elderly or socially isolated, their disappearances initially attributed to senility, accidents, or simply drifting away. Yet they shared one undeniable, now glaringly obvious commonality. Each had recently signed over power of attorney to a seemingly benevolent, non-profit organization named Benevolent Hands of Chicago, supposedly dedicated to helping the elderly manage their financial affairs and property. This organization had since dissolved suspiciously in late 1994, its records mysteriously vanished, its phone lines disconnected. This was the lead. This was the dark underbelly Art had uncovered. A complex, sophisticated land fraud and money laundering scheme, preying on vulnerable individuals, facilitated by corrupt lawyers and shadowed by organized crime. Art had been sniffing around it, getting too close. He must have stumbled upon information, perhaps even a defector, that made him an immediate, existential threat to their operation. The anonymous tip wasn't a random act. It was a desperate warning from someone on the inside, or perhaps a calculated lure set by the perpetrators who knew Art was closing in, a meticulously crafted trap designed to neutralize him permanently. The locket was bait left just for him. The detectives meticulously pieced together the fragments of this horrifying puzzle. Benevolent Hands was confirmed to be a sophisticated front, operated by a notorious Chicago crime family, the Morettis, known for their quiet but ruthless expansion into legitimate-looking businesses. They laundered vast sums of illicit money through these property acquisitions, using intimidation, legal loopholes, and sometimes outright violence to secure deeds from unsuspecting victims. Art Miller, an honest, incorruptible cop with an almost obsessive dedication to justice, was a direct and dangerous threat to their meticulously crafted criminal empire. The anonymous tip to Art was likely from a low-level member, perhaps a disgruntled associate or someone with a fleeting, desperate spark of conscience, trying to save him or warn him. But the Morettis were always a step ahead. They knew Art was coming, the trap was set. The blow to his head wasn't random. It was the precise, brutal efficiency of a professional hit. The careful wrapping and distant burial in the rural Illinois field were the undeniable hallmarks of a powerful syndicate trying to make a problem disappear forever, ensuring silence. The reopening of the case, fueled by the horrific discovery of Art's remains, led to a cascade of arrests. Not, initially, for Art's murder directly, but for the wider, intricate fraud scheme. Old evidence now viewed through a new, high-tech lens, supported by new forensic capabilities, and finally, a chilling understanding of the motive built an unassailable case. Several members of the Moretti family, including their aging consigliere, were brought in for questioning. They stonewalled, their faces impassive, citing convenient memory loss, demanding their lawyers. The deeply ingrained code of silence, generations old, was almost impenetrable, a wall of omerta that protected the true architects of violence. However, the sheer, undeniable reality of Art's body being unearthed after 11 long years, the tangible proof of his murder, was a powerful, unsettling catalyst. It shamed some, frightened others, and finally, one longtime associate, a man named Angelo Angie Marino, now dying of advanced pancreatic cancer and facing a long prison sentence for an unrelated racketeering charge, finally broke. He confessed to being present when Art Miller was brought, already incapacitated, to a different, equally desolate warehouse, not the foundry itself, but a nearby, forgotten one used by the Mortys for discreet business, shortly after his disappearance. He described the chilling professionalism of the hit, the cold, efficient execution. The specific names of the men who dealt the final, fatal blows were given, along with the undeniable orders that came directly from the very top of the Morty hierarchy. He described in grim detail how Art's body was prepared for burial, meant to be permanent, meant to erase him from existence. He confirmed that the locket had been strategically planted at the foundry as calculated bait, a twisted way to ensure Art would come alone, a macabre, personal message of doom. The emotional impact on Sarah and Lily was profound, a tsunami of grief and revelation. The truth, raw, brutal, and utterly devastating, was finally laid bare. Art hadn't abandoned them. He had been silenced, brutally murdered for his unwavering pursuit of justice, for daring to expose a darkness too profound for the city to acknowledge. The arrests for his murder, though a partial vindication, couldn't erase the 11 years of silent grief, the haunting void, the unanswered questions that had gnawed at their souls. The wheels of justice, slow and deliberate, had finally begun to turn, but the deep, indelible scars of a life cut short and a family shattered remained. The vast cornfield in rural Illinois, once a place of quiet solitude, became a stark, grim reminder of the dark currents that flow beneath the surface of even the most mundane existence. The earth, it seemed, had a memory, a silent witness to humanity's darkest deeds. And sometimes, after years of silence, after decades of holding its breath, it decided to speak, yielding its horrifying secrets to the most unexpected hands. The true cost of a life dedicated to truth, in a city where truth could be a dangerous, even fatal commodity, was finally revealed. Detective Arthur Miller was home, but the echoes of his final, terrible moments would forever haunt those who loved him, a spectral presence in their lives. And the vast, indifferent landscape of Illinois held its grim secret for 11 long, silent years, only to yield it to the tireless, innocent work of a farmer, simply plowing his land, revealing the chilling truth buried beneath.